lies in the very center of Eurasia, in the heart, or in its heart. And shared by four states, Russian Federation, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and a small part of China. As you may see, there are a lot of protected areas which have already been established there, and quite a lot to be established in the next 10 years. So these protected areas, of course, serve as sort of stepping stones for the implementation of connectivity conservation management and establishment a huge connectivity mega corridor. The idea of transboundary cooperation for biodiversity conservation in the region is dates back to almost 15 years, and about 4 years ago we have got the first discussion of implementation the connectivity conservation approach as the baseline for to figure out the transboundary cooperation of protected areas. And in 2010 there was an international workshop in Altay-Sayan, in the Russian portion of Altay-Sayan, which some of you attended, and the preliminary action plan for transboundary management of the Altay-Sayan corridor was discussed and agreed. And this whole story was succeeded somehow last year in 2011, when two transboundary protected areas were officially established by respective intergovernmental agreements. They are Transboundary Reserve Altai, shared by Russian Federation and Kazakhstan, and the other one is Ulsan Basin, with also bilateral protected area, parts of it lies in Russian Federation and the parts belongs to Mongolia. This is a real critical step towards implementation of connectivity conservation management approaches, and in order to foster it under the UNDP ICI Altay-Sayan project, the climate change adaptation strategy for conservation of its rich biodiversity was developed for the Russian portion of Altay-Sayan. And I listed here several key principles in order to facilitate climate change adaptation, and as you may see, connectivity conservation was recognized as a key principle of adapting to climate change in this region. The strategy also includes 9 target programs of different fields of ecosystem-based adaptation, and one target program specifically deals with transboundary cooperation to foster implementation of connectivity conservation approach. Another critical step in order to reach the connectivity conservation principles is developing the management plan for one of the transboundary reserves, which has been recently established officially. And this project, funded by the German government, is targeted to develop a management plan and establishing a steering committee for this transboundary reserve. And one of its potential and expected outcomes is preparation of nomination this year to get an official status of transboundary biosphere reserve of UNESCO, which we believe will be helpful to promote further the idea of transboundary cooperation and establishment large-scale connectivity corridor in Altay-Sayan. Another initiative which is likely happening in Altay-Sayan is the extension of existing World Heritage Site. So as you may see, we are trying to promote the Altay-Sayan internationally by different tools, and now there is an agreement to extend existing World Heritage Site, the Gold Mountains of Altai in the Russian Federation, by including the number of protected areas in the adjoining parts of Mongolia and in eastern Kazakhstan. But of course we face lots of problems, and I try to prioritize them somehow. And the first one that unfortunately China doesn't actively participate in the process, the transboundary cooperation of protected area and biodiversity conservation, as well as in connectivity conservation issues. And also, if we notice and observe that we really want to get success in these multilateral agreements, the most crucial thing is political support. And this initiative normally lots of different stakeholders, so coordination is leadership, and leadership is very crucial thing to success. However, we are optimists and look forward for as future of having joint management, joint connectivity corridor with Altai. And with this brief overview, I would like to thank you for your attention and any questions.
I'd now like to introduce Ed Miller. He's going to talk on the Mesoamerican quality corridor. I'll hand over to Ed. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'm supposed to tell you about over 20 years of history in 4 minutes. Back in the early 90s, I remember going to one of the early meetings. It was called Path of Panthers. It was a very biological focus. Then it turned a little more ecological, and a lot of people put social in there, but more in words than in reality. And in 2006, the funding ended basically for the large project. According to the World Bank, about $800 million went into the region related to CBM at some time. There's still some initiatives going on. Actually, the VIEC is one of them. And in different countries, Costa Rica, I say they're a little bit more stronger. But a lot of the money went to institutional strengthening, ministries, meetings, international events, and things like that. And the reality now is that our region is on fire. You can see some of the big spots that are not burnt are the protected areas. So connectivity is a very big challenge. If you look in, that's the Maya Biosphere Reserve, and the fires in 10 years. That's Honduras and Nicaragua, the World Heritage Society Biosphere Reserve. If you look in, you can see the land use change. And if you look at the new Biosphere Reserve that's being proposed, boundary to UNESCO, that's a buffer zone, and that's the core areas, and they are also on fire. So if we look at that reality, I would say our biggest hope now is with landscape restoration. So actually the H target 15 has to be brought in here, and that's 15% of the degraded land brought back. And the impacts of climate change, both in disasters as well as drought and other factors, are actually potentially an open door to enhancing connectivity. People already recognize it, and the government of El Salvador is starting a huge initiative on landscape restoration because the livelihood of people are already at stake. And one of the biggest threats we still have is the corporate sector. Costa Rica, and I didn't bring pictures, but we're invaded by pineapple, and that's for European and North American markets. And there is land use change in Costa Rica right now because of pineapple. So there are huge extensions of pineapple. And these monocultures coming out with biofuels too in the region are the biggest threat. It's not anymore the small farmers. 60% of land use change currently is by big corporations. So we have to deal with this in a different way, and there are other interests in Guatemala. We have the drug issues, the drug lords that are doing land use change to launder money. So the future I see is joining efforts in terms of restoring landscapes, restoring livelihoods, and the social issues brought into this restoration, I think, will give us new opportunities for connectivity. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. Alison Woodley will now talk on some work that she's been undertaking, or others have been undertaking in North America. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to launch right in quickly here with my 4-minute limit. So I'm going to talk about 2 large landscape scale conservation initiatives in Canada where there's been a commitment to protect communities half of large areas. The Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, my organization, has a vision of protecting at least half of Canada's public lands and waters. And that's a vision we've had since 2005. And it really is focused on more advanced scale conservation, including connectivity. We're a national NGO, and it's important to note that 90% of Canada's lands are public. We focused on, our largest program area is focused on protecting Canada's boreal, which is a hugely significant, globally significant ecosystem, which I won't go into the details of because I don't have time. And our vision of protecting at least half really started in 2003, where there was a significant partnership convened by our colleagues of the Canadian Boreal Initiative, which included conservation groups, industry, First Nations, coming together to sign the Canadian Boreal Forest Conservation Framework, which was a national vision that called for the establishment of a network of large, interconnected, protected areas covering about half of the country's boreal forest, and using leading-edge sustainable development practices in the remaining areas. So, in response to that, we've had two major commitments by subnational governments to at least half protection. One in Ontario, Northern Ontario, and one in Northern Quebec. Ontario's Far North commitment was made in 2008 by Premier McGuinty on a total planning area of over 400,000 square kilometers, which is 1.5 times the size of Italy. And the commitment was to protect at least half of the Far North through community-based land use planning. And of course, that was extremely key in the announcement because that's how the planning will have to happen if it's going to be successful. There was a science advisory panel and a multi-party advisory panel working on that. In 2010, there was an act passed called the Far North Act, which confirms the objective of protecting at least half in an interconnected network of protected areas. And it provides a legislative foundation for the land use planning. It's a joint process between First Nations and the province of Ontario. We're at the implementation stage now, and it is extremely challenging. The comments about political commitment rang true because in an economic downturn, minority government keeping that commitment going and staying ahead of industrial development in the face of really significant resource development pressures is proving challenging. So stay tuned on how things go on that front. In neighboring Quebec, shortly after Ontario, the Premier, Jean Charest, committed to protecting half of the Planano, which is an even larger area, twice the size of France, and it's home to 120,000 people, 25% of them are Indigenous people. And that was part of his broader Planano commitment, which was really an economic development plan, a long-term economic development plan that was played as a sustainable development plan. So this is a conservation commitment as part of that broader plan. The commitment is to protect half, free from industrial development, protect environmental values. The commitment, more detailed commitments that have come out since include protecting half by 2035, initiating ecological planning by 2013, and this was something we worked very, very hard to clarify because the only way that this was going to work and achieve connectivity was if we had an ecological planning framework, which wasn't included in the initial announcement. They've since announced that they're going to protect 20% of the area by 2020, and that is tied explicitly to the IUCN targets and the IUCN criteria. And there's a commitment to develop the ecological and environmental knowledge that's needed to implement this. These are big commitments, and that's the degree of detail I'm going to give you on them. I was asked to provide just a few thoughts on successes on having achieved these big commitments, and I put the success in quotations because, of course, success is only truly success when it happens on the ground. It's not success when you get a commitment yet, but it is a step in the right direction. And the points that I would make are that really there's a role for civil society here in providing a big vision, bringing people together, bringing people along, and really securing big commitments. That can actually work quite well. But it's only going to work on the ground if it is a partnership with Indigenous communities and local communities, because that's where conservation has to happen in the land use planning phase. And commitments aren't enough. I mean, you can get a commitment to at least half, but that only, you have to keep at it, and keep at it as it's being developed and turning into policy. And in both these cases, ecological outcomes were linked to economic planning outcomes, so, or to economic outcomes. So really they were embedded in a sustainable development framework. It wasn't just a conservation plan. It was a conservation plan and economic development plan, which was really the driver for governments to make these announcements in the first place in these large intact landscapes. And finally, there is a motion at the Congress acknowledging Quebec's advancement of conservation in the Royal Region, which I would encourage you to support.
Just like to thank all of our presenters in that short speed session. What I'd like to do now is encourage people in the audience, if you have questions for anyone in the seats in front of me, or in fact any of the presenters, then please feel free to step up to the microphone and raise a question or seek some comment from the panel members. Don't be shy.
Welcome.
And I might start, Edward, in terms of the fire and its application in your area. It's obviously had a fairly large scale impact. You mentioned that